So it occurs to me as I look out that there's a lot of new faces, which is good. And so if you don't know who I am, my name is Mike. Most of the time you will find me behind a guitar, but occasionally they let me loose when the opportunity arises and allow me to speak. So Doug is away. I'm spending some time with family in Texas, and so I have the opportunity to talk with you some today. As I prepared this week, Friday I took off of work, which is unusual for me, because I wanted to do some spring cleaning around the house. And as I was going through some things and putting some stuff in the attic, because I'm lazy and I had Christmas things in my garage, I encountered a box of things from high school. And there was a senior book that I put together that was all about me. And I had to do it for an English class. And so as I'm reflecting up in the attic, looking at all of these different pictures and stories and things, it occurred to me that I went through a lot of phases in high school. All right. Looking at all the pictures, I went through a preppy phase where I wore Abercrombie and Fitch clothes and boat shoes everywhere. I went through a country phase where I wore Wrangler jeans and boots and camouflage shirts. I went through a hip-hop phase. I went through every phase imaginable, right? One of the phases that stuck out to me the most was I went through a drama phase. And I don't mean drama as in arguments or discourse or anything like that. I mean drama in the literal sense. When I was in high school, I was a drama geek, right? So think Glee or High School Musical, and that's what I did. I was the pillar of popularity, obviously, in high school. I did musicals. That's who I hung out with. And I was really into it, which was unique for me because as I was growing up as a child, I was painfully shy. And so this idea that in high school I spent time in front of tons of people is a little bit weird, right? But I was really into it. So much so that I joined the International Thespian Society, right? It's a group of people that are also geeks, right? At the international level. And to become a member, you had to do several things. And it's all based off your high school, but I had to do a couple of things. First was to put together a booklet about myself as a thespian, right? So I had to prove about all these hours and dramatic things that I had done to justify why I would be part of this group or why I should be eligible. And in this booklet were some tremendously embarrassing things as I think back. First, I had to create a coat of arms of sorts that was representative of me. And just for all of you guys are wondering, I destroyed that book a long time ago, so it'll never see the light of day. But there was a coat of arms in there that represented me as an actor. I had to create a mantra or a motto about myself and what that would be for me as an actor. But the biggest thing, or the most difficult thing, was what we called a Hell Week. And so there was a week in which I was initiate, right? And so for that week, I had to do whatever anybody who was already part of the society told me to do. I wore a blue triangle with a gold T in the middle of it everywhere that I went. And if you were already in the Thespian Society, you could ask me to do things that were dramatic, okay? This came to a head in the Orange Park Mall. I was taking a break from work, and a couple of people from another school saw me and approached me and asked me to do something. And so me, being a person who wanted to be part of the crew, decided to do that. And what they asked me to do was to swim in the Orange Park Mall. There was no water at the time, so I was instructed to swim on the ground and make it realistic. So I did. And so I swam on the ground in the middle of the mall, like I was swimming in the ocean. And then they said, for 60 seconds, I want you to act like you've been eaten by a shark, or you're being eaten by a shark. And so I did that. So you can imagine all the screaming and flailing around that would occur if you were being eaten by a shark. I assume I've never been eaten by a shark, so I wouldn't know. I was guessing. But for 60 seconds, I did that. And after that time, there was about 50 people that were gathered around me, including security, wondering if I had lost my mind. So I think back on that, and it occurs to me, there were some questionable decisions in high school. One of which was this idea that I was giving a tremendous amount of power to and influence to high school students to tell me what to do, to be able to instruct me on what to do. And so today I want to talk about that. I want to talk about that in the framework as a Christ follower and this idea of influence. In the ways that God does, it's ironic that I'm talking about this today, considering this past week, one of what I consider one of the most influential people here at the church left us to be with the Lord. And so that's the way he works, right? And so I got to reflect on a lot of that and a lot of all of the quiet influence, I would call Charles, and the things that he would do. And so today is especially special for me because I know what it looks like to have influence as a Christ follower done right. It's important for us as believers to get influence right because it's a dangerous situation. Now, when I say influence, I want to be clear. I'm not talking about manipulation or coercion or anything like that. I'm talking about a godly example. I'm talking about living our lives in such a way that others would see Christ, right? And it's dangerous for us as believers because the world is trying to influence us. If you're on social media, you're influenced all the time. Ads, on TV, billboards, right? We just went through a political cycle where people spend millions and millions of dollars to reach people, to give them more money so they can spend millions and millions of dollars more to reach other people to do the same thing, right? People and places and things are constantly trying to influence us to see their point of view, to believe what they believe, to do what they'd like us to do. What's dangerous about that is as we go through this process that it becomes second nature, and that's the real dangerous part, because as something becomes second nature for us, as something becomes subconscious, we don't think about it, right? And so we have to be active in this idea that there are people that are trying to influence us and that we are subconsciously influencing others. And this is a big deal for us as followers of Christ. So today I want to spend a little bit of time talking about influence with you. We're going to be looking at a story in the book of Esther. And to lead you up to this, I want to give you a little bit of background. First of all, because the book of Esther is truly a story. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. There's action, there's love, there's all things that you would see in a story. And so up to this point, there's a couple of things that I want us to understand before we start to read. First of all, the book of Esther is surprised about Esther, right? And the people that are around her. So we learn a couple of things. First of all, that Esther, she lives in the Persian Empire, right? And through a series of fortunate events, she has become the queen, right? And we also find a character in the story called Mordecai, and Mordecai is her cousin. He's about 15 years or so older than her, and she was orphaned at a young age, and so Mordecai has raised her up to this point. We learn a few things about Mordecai to where we're going to begin. Some of those are that, first of all, he was a man of integrity, that he was a man of conviction and wasn't afraid to stand up or to go against the grain of sorts for the things that he was truly passionate about. And so as we go through the story, we learn that he, through his position as the cousin of the queen, has learned of a plot to eradicate all of the Jews in the empire. And the king has issued an edict to allow this to happen. And so, being the man of integrity that he was, decided that he needed to do something about it. Given that his cousin was the queen, the most logical choice was to approach her to do that. So today, it's going to be on page 495 in your Bible. I want to apologize in advance. We are going to read a chapter, verses 1 through 17, okay? So bear with me, and then I promise we'll get through it, and then we'll get to learn more about influence. And so it's Esther chapter 4, verses 1 through 17. It's on page 495 in your pew Bible, if you'd like to follow. When Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. but he went only as far as the king's gate, because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter it. In every province to which the edict and the order of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's eunuchs and female attendants came and told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress. She sent clothes for him to put on instead of his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. When Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs assigned to attend her, he ordered him to find out what was so troubling Mordecai and why. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict for their annihilation, which had been published in Susa, to show to Esther and explain to her, and he told him to instruct her to go into the king's presence to beg for mercy and plead with him for the people. Hathach went back and reported to Esther and Mordecai what Mordecai had said. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, "All the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king." When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer: "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But for you and your families you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this?" Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai: "Go gather all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When it is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions. Whew. Sorry. So, all good information, right? So, we see Mordecai learning of this plight, this plot to eradicate the Jews, approaches the queen Esther, and asks her to do something about it. So there's 3 characters in this story that I want us to look at that I think we can learn something about influence from the perspective of a follower of Christ. There's Mordecai, Esther, and the king. The first is Mordecai. And this truth that whether or not we like it or not, God puts us in positions of influence in our lives for his kingdom. God puts us in positions of influence for the people around us for his kingdom. I never really understood the power of influence until I had a child. As a father, I want my son to be everything that I am not, right? All of the good characteristics that I have, and none of the bad. And so that's a very humbling experience because it makes you aware of all the issues that you have, all of the shortcomings. And you need to be aware because I don't want him to have them, so I try not to do them. Unfortunately, the old adage goes, parents have eyes in the back of their heads. Children have eyes everywhere. They have eyes in the front, in the back, the top, the bottom, on the sides. They see everything, right? And some of it's little things, right? If you put my son next to me, there is no question that he is mine. What's interesting, though, is if you watch us walk, we walk the same. I don't know if it's genetics or if it's just the way he sees. I'm his model of how a man should walk, so he walks the same as I do. He does little nuances that are characteristics of me, right? So they catch on to a lot of that stuff, but they also see the bad things, right? Self-admittedly, driving, or more specifically, traffic affects me worse than it does other people, I think. I am horrible with traffic. I'm a pretty even keel guy if you're ever around me. Not in the car. It bothers me a lot, right? Because I think I'll make a reaching statement, but there's a lot of bad drivers out there. I can remember one day when I was driving Grant to school, there was a bad driver in front of me. This person was on the phone, and it's one of those situations where they're on the phone, they're not paying attention, so they're slow to start because they're not paying attention when the light turns green, and they're quick to brake because they're not paying attention, they don't want to hit somebody. So it's doubly bad. Well, this person has made me miss 2 lights, and I'm about as far as I can go. Right, I'm holding on to the wheel as hard as I can, trying to hold it back, and I'm going to miss this light, and I know it, and I'm about to explode, right? And so we're getting there, the light's turning red, I'm about to lay in on this person, and out of the back of my car, I hear this little voice yell at the top of his lungs, "Come on, car, let's go!" And so first of all, I look into the passenger seat to see if my wife is in the car, because if she is, I'm in trouble, right? And then as any good parent, I turn around and look at him and go, "We don't yell. That's not nice," right? They see everything. And as parents, we're put in a position of influence. And as Christ followers, this is true for us as well. Mordecai was given the opportunity to influence for the kingdom. He had a choice, right? He knew of a plot that was happening, and he could have left. He could have leaned on the queen and said, "Protect me," but he didn't. He chose to engage her. He chose to take a risk. He chose to use the position, the example that he had set over his life as he had raised her, to ask her to do something to further the kingdom, to protect those around him. We're given opportunities daily to influence those around us. The second person I want to look at today is Esther. So Esther, up to this point, so the plot is to eradicate the Jewish people in the Persian Empire. Well, what we hadn't discussed is that no one knew, first of all, that she was Jewish. She had kept that a secret because Mordecai asked her to. And so she had a tremendous amount to lose in this situation. Right? So it's a Cinderella story, from orphan to queen, the Persian Empire. Now, at that time, the Persian Empire was the strongest empire in the world. So the highest ranking woman in the most powerful empire in the world, she had everything to lose. She had everything she would ever want, right? If you read through the story, which I encourage you to do, she had the king wrapped around her finger. All she had to do was show up, and his words were, "Tell me what you want. Do you want half my kingdom? I'll give it to you. Just ask," right? Everything to lose in this situation. And she was scared. We read through, what did she do? She said, all right. She bartered with them first and said, "It's against the law. I could be put to death." And then she comes back and says, "Pray for me. Fast for me. I'll do the same. And then we'll see how it goes. If I perish, then I perish. If not, then I don't," right? And so there's this idea around influence that it's more than just about us, but it's about a bigger mission. It's about the kingdom of God. And it's something that we need to take seriously. And Esther got that. The world, as so often as it does, is contrary to us as believers. In this situation, the world tells me that it's about me and me only, right? If you want it now, go buy it on credit. Worry about it later on, right? The world tells me that it's about what makes me happy, to do what I want to do. But so oftentimes we find this in the Bible that that's not always necessarily the case, that there's a bigger mission that we're trying to accomplish. That there's more than just my happiness at stake, that there's eternity at stake for people. Paul talks about this in this beautiful description around what he refers to as his rights as a believer. And he talks about this idea that he becomes all things to all men. And I read through that in 1 Corinthians, and he's talking about that he becomes like those under the law, even though he's not under the law. He becomes like one that is not under the law. He becomes weak to those that are weak. His words are that I become all things to all men so that I might win some. See, Paul got this idea that it's more than just about me, right? He's not saying this because he's not trying to be genuine or he's not trying to be transparent. He's saying this because he acknowledges that there are situations in which I may be able and permissible to do a thing, but I choose not to. I choose to influence. I choose to be an example to those around me because the mission is bigger than just my individual happiness at that time. So as believers, what does that look like for us? Sometimes that looks like not posting something on Facebook that you have the right to post. Right? Sometimes that means forgiving someone that you don't necessarily want to forgive. Sometimes that means not saying something when you feel like that you have the right to say it. Because the truth is that people are always watching. And they're judging us on the actions and the words that we say. And when you wear the name of Christ, then they're also judging him. It's about something bigger than our individual selves. It's about the kingdom. The last person I want to look at today is the king. It's King Xerxes. If you're in the NIV Bible, it may go by a different name, but that's him. He's the king of the Persian Empire. And as we read through this story, while he's the most powerful man really in the world at this point, he's the most easily influenced. We find that Esther becomes queen because the queen before her didn't do what he asked her to do. So we asked some people, well, what do I do about that? We'll get rid of her and we'll get a new queen. So he says, sounds like a great idea, right? Haman approaches him and says, hey, let's eradicate all the Jews. Even though we learned that Mordecai, prior to this, a Jewish man, had thwarted a plot to kill the king prior to that. And Haman, through this process, who has a deep-seated hate for the Jews, and this goes back hundreds and hundreds of years from his ancestors, is able to persuade the king to issue an edict to eradicate all the Jews. Well, Esther approaches him. She basically cooks him dinner twice and tells him that, hey, this is a bad idea. And he says, okay, well, let's switch that. Kill Haman, and then I'll issue a new edict that says not to eradicate the Jews, to give them the right to defend themselves, right? He's very easily influenced. And from this, I look at that and go, the first 2 points were really about the way we interact with the world. The last one, I want to talk about us, right? And it's this idea that we need to be guarded around those that we allow positions or powers of influence in our lives. When I was in the 9th grade, I made the toughest decision that I've ever made. Right, I was given a unique opportunity, and that was the opportunity for a different life. I grew up in a very tumultuous situation, and I had some family that after some things happened, I was given the opportunity to start anew, as it were. And the unfortunate side of that is that my new fresh start was going to happen in the same city that I already lived. It was going to happen at the same schools, the same places that I hung out. And so this life that I had led, that I was trying to get away from, was going to share space. It intersected. And through what I can only describe as God's intervention or his providence, I decided that it'd probably be best if I was to distance myself from the people that I had in that past life. And so in the 9th grade, I decided to do that. Well, if you've ever turned your back on people, for whatever reason, good or bad, there's consequences to that, especially when you're a high school student. I was bullied. I was made fun of by people that I was closest to. It was a dark place for me. It was hard, right? But it was necessary. And only through the strength of God was I able to do that. And that was laid the groundwork for the life that I had prior to that. And you see, it's important that we understand that there are people in our lives that we allow positions of influence and of power. This is hard for us as believers because as people that are on a mission or supposed to be on a mission, we're called to love the unlovable, to reach those that are weak. So we're going to be put in situations and positions where we're going to be around people that may not necessarily align with our beliefs, our core values, but we're to influence them for God. Influence them in the right way. So don't hear me say what I'm not saying, and that distance yourself from those around you that you're to be ministering to, but be guarded about the people that you allow closest to you. Every one of us in this room, if we were honest, have people in our lives that influence us one way or the other. And they can influence us towards God or away from Him. So we have to be guarded for those things. So I ask you today, as I close, who influences you? Who are you influencing? Are you active in that? Are you purposeful? Is it about the kingdom, or is it about yourself? Or are you passive? Are you just letting it happen and hoping that it turns out well? God gives us opportunities every day to be His representative. He calls us to be the salt and the light of the world, to represent Him, to wear His name. Because the reality is that it's so important we get it right, because there's more than just today. There's eternities at stake. Would you pray with me?